Welcome back to our Awakening Essentials here at So Spiritual and transCODES. My name is Jona Bryndis. I'm a professional energy healer, energy coach, and today I want to talk about toxicity, what it is and how it comes that we attract so much into our life. Stay tuned. We're going to go through all these different factors and parameters that might attract toxicity into your life. Spiritual growth, spiritual freedom is a process of self-proclamation and self-selection. Okay? The power that comes out of your maturity, such as wisdom, for instance, comes through you stepping up. And how can you learn to step up? You need to surrender and trust and allow yourself to experience, to internalize, because that then helps you to discover and let go of all these things in your life that you've been externalizing, that really aren't your beliefs, that really aren't your values. Okay? So don't just sit there and consume, guys. You need to start feeling what you are here for and who you are so that you can grow. You have to put this into actualization. And all this here that I'm guiding you through is the school of higher spiritual awakening and spiritual freedom. All right? Learning to understand your soul language, learning to speak with your soul, learning to appreciate your true self, and embodying being a true self, living in truth, okay? This is the ultimate growth. And it comes through truth and freedom and love. These are the things that you need to value higher than anything else. Okay? So what is toxicity? Let's look into toxicity here and what it is maybe that contributes to toxicity in our life and maybe what it is that we do to enable it. That's consistently questioning our reality or ourselves and accepting growth, preventing behaviors such as, expressions of moodiness, anxiety, anger, and all these coping mechanisms that are being generated through that in ourselves and others as normal, whether we are aware of it or not. It is the consistent and slow contamination, undermining, degrading, or harming of inner balance and inner self-awareness, of inner freedom, generating these coping behaviors in ourselves and others that prevent growth. Now, as I mentioned before, there are some things such as just simply being young and unexperienced, that make it more difficult for us to discern things and to understand, what is okay and what isn't. There's also, like exposure, one of the biggest external factors, where we just karmically been born into situations that are just toxic in and of itself. And if that's all we know, this discernment is very, very difficult. That's why I added the what we accept as norm here to the definition. So it's the lack of experience or maturity, the lack of discernment, and a missing roadmap, a missing navigation tool, a missing purpose. These are the three main reasons why we accept toxicity. But in the core of it all is the disconnectedness from ourself, from our true self, our true feelings, our true needs, our true heart's desire. What causes toxicity, or what can cause toxicity in our lives? There's external and internal factors. And it's of course very complex, but I'm just going to zoom through here, okay? External factors are exposure. I mean, if you live in a toxic environment, even if it is contaminated through actual poison, be it chemicals in, food, chemicals in cleaning materials, chemicals in your house. Obviously, over time, this compounds and will, create toxicity in you. But the same applies, of course, to emotional toxicity. If you're surrounded by people who are extremely negative, who are extremely emotional, say, or irritable or unpredictable, all right, that create a feeling of unsafety, insecurity in you, okay, then that's a toxic exposure, all right. And mentally and spiritually, exposure can also mean that you have been indoctrinated, okay, that you are being exposed to a set of very narrow beliefs, okay, that you've never actually checked yourself. Other external factors are also things that we all know too well. Is distraction, when we constantly get distracted through just like, other people's dramas or the drama of living, or right now it's a lot of uncertainty in the world, okay? So distraction can, really mess with this perception of normal and what is toxic and what isn't. Depletion, you all know this adrenal fatigue that we all have, this like being completely drained at the end of the day, does not allow us to discern correctly. Obviously, if we are in environments or relationships where there's a lot of crazy making, no, I didn't say this, where there's gaslighting, that you might have not even detected yet, then this can also be a reason, an external reason why you don't have the ability to discern. Okay. Then there's addictions. Addiction is a huge factor for toxicity, not just the drug or the med itself. All right. Addictive behaviors. And you all know we also look at the ego in and of itself as an addictive structure in us. Mental illness, unfortunately, mental and also physical illness. So if we are caretakers, if we are surrounded by people who are very ill, this also can lead to toxic exposure. And if you are a caretaker, you need to listen very, very carefully, because for you, everything that is being said here and that I suggest for you to work on basically counts tenfold. Because if you voluntarily put yourself into this place that you work with other people's toxicity or illness, especially mental illness, guys, all right, then you really got to know who you are. You really need to know where your center is. You need to know how to self-clear. You need to know how to do this very quickly, because you're in constant exposure of this. So medication can also do this, and of course, certain behaviors that other people have, such as OCD. People who are extremely controlling, all right, can create an environment for you that limits your freedom, even though they say, oh, no, of course you have the right to choose whatever you want, but, okay? So here are the markers of how we internally allow or enable or even promote toxicity in our lives, and what balance we need to look at. For instance, so most and foremost, this is especially true for empaths and energetically sensitives. There's this fear of confrontation. We have this fear of big emotions. And so on this scale, on this sliding scale, we fear the most when somebody vents. But at the same time, this also makes us suppress a lot. And therefore, it happens too that we vent. And that is, something that promotes toxicity, because it doesn't really allow growth. So we never actually get to the place where we can resolve issues together. Another internal factor is the unrealistic expectations that we have towards ourselves, towards our partner, towards our relationship. Often also, accompanied with an idealization or some kind of idea of perfectionism. But at the same time, we also feed self-degradation. We also feed this hyper vigilant criticism about ourselves or the other. Criticizing, therefore, is also something that enables or attracts toxicity in our lives, whether it's criticizing the other and totally focus on, all the things that the other needs to change, or this questioning, this constant questioning, constantly sort of, rehashing and ruminating about things. Another aspect is the guilt tripping that we do either consciously or unconsciously, or that is being done to us. And the other end of that scale is the self-berating, is the constantly feeling responsible for everything, constantly feeling like we've did something wrong, constantly trying to find the mistake with us. This is one of the reasons why gaslighting works so well with us empaths, because we already constantly search for the fault in us. We already are willing, to assume that it's us. Okay. Another aspect is the shaming. Many of us have shame attachments from our childhood. It's part of our trauma. And so when somebody comes in with somewhat of a shaming attitude, how could you do this or something like this, all right? It like literally sets out all common sense in us. But the other side of the scale is the self-bashing. This comes from this seeking the mistake within us, and often produces behavior patterns such as victimizing. So we feel this huge injustice, but we don't really speak up out of the known fear of confrontation or the ramifications of speaking up, namely venting or big emotions. And we eat this in ourselves, we eat it in, and therefore, we feel victimized, and as a result of it, we're forming resentments inside, and we secretly take a revenge, maybe by withdrawing or by little, sarcastic remarks here and there. You got to watch this. Victimizing is a huge, huge phenomenon amongst people who are empathetic and who tend to swallow a lot from others. Then next we have the neediness, all right? This clinging and this constantly wanting to have reassurance, constantly wanting to have physical contact, constantly hovering, always texting and so forth. But at the same time, on the other end of the scale, the withdrawing. So it doesn't matter which part it is we're doing. We end up doing both to a degree, but we never really do this without the extremes. There's nothing in between, and therefore all these patterns that I'm listing here, there's more, they all promote toxicity because there's no resolution, no healing, no growth possible. Another one, and again, this is a huge one, is passivity, is to let things happen, to not do anything about it, to just, to see it. It's not that you guys can't see it, to let it happen and to withdraw, all right, instead of doing something about it. But on the other end of the scale is also this over responsibility, feeling responsible for everything, sort of becoming sort of a helicopter person, constantly doing everything for others. That's the other side of the scale. You got to understand that. And this, of course, has, issue or shows issues with boundaries. So toxicity really, in essence, is an issue of connectedness and boundaries, because going into the extremes of these things that we are discussing here always leads to toxic coping patterns. All right, so for instance, going into indecisiveness with things because we ruminate so much that we can't ever come to a conclusion, or we have so much fear of messing things up or losing things, right, is really on the other end of the scale, the same as overthinking things, the same as, constantly rehashing and reiterating the pros and cons, but never actually going into action. OCD is one of the things that I want to point your attention at. It's something that many of you have developed, or you see this in your partners, that is almost glorified. It's almost cool to be kind of OCD about certain things, right? And it's so widespread nowadays that nobody actually thinks there's anything wrong with this. But If you actually look at what OCD really does to a person and where it's rooted, it's fear-based, right? It's over controlling everything. And it's funny, maybe the little quirks that we discover, but really this isn't funny. This is also a lack of boundaries, and this can breed toxicity in a relationship if one of you guys is really OCD or both. I've seen a lot of relationships where both are OCD about certain things, and all these other patterns that I mentioned here then become a part of this, all right? With this is of course the control here that we exert, and many of you are not aware of this, but guilt tripping somebody, or having this secret or silent resentment towards somebody, the things that I describe as victimizer type of behaviors, those are actually forms of covert control. So it's one thing, to be with someone who obviously tries to control us, who tries to control our life, who forbids us to read certain books, or be part of certain groups or activities. That's one thing. But there's the other side of that scale is, covertly controlling what other people do or what they like by judging it or by degrading it and or minimizing it. Not to mention, of course, the minimizing of emotions, of feelings. All right, so to literally judge or comment on how other people feel. We are not just a victim of this, guys. You have to pay really, really close attention. How many times we are more or less telling other people how they're feeling, or how they're supposed to feel, or how they're not supposed to feel. This has a lot to do with those mental beliefs and these hardwires that we accept. Another thing is not being aware of things, not actually being aware of the needs that we have, not being aware of things that deplete us, all right, and not expressing them correctly. Or the other end of the scale, this oversharing, this over-expressing, and constantly pulling the other person into your drama, what you don't get, and so forth. And of course, there's also guilt tripping. It is covert stuff linked to this, all right? There's so much that goes on without us being aware of, where we actually invite toxicity into our relationships, into our lives. That explains why you keep attracting certain things, why there's so much replay and repeat. In a separate video, I talk about energetic projection, energetic push and pull, all right, and why we tend to absorb other people's energies. Well, the reason why we absorb other people's energies so much, beside the fact that we have, sort of more fine-tuned tools for that, is that we project more. Okay, so an energetic projection is, can be felt by the other person, but if their tools aren't that fine-tuned, if they don't really know what is going on, they won't really know what it is that is being projected on them, and they will try to, basically counter-project this onto you. So a lot of times in this extreme, we get hit. We absorb our own projections, guys. We just use the other person as a mirror. And that's a form of abuse too. So I want you guys to be fair there. It's easy to criticize other people by looking at how they reacted in this moment and so forth. But it's really important to look at our own push-pull mechanisms. One big reason, and probably the biggest here, coming from psychology, is trauma and trauma memory, and how we suspect things, how we go into the replay of our trauma, be it emotionally or mentally, or sometimes even physically. So when someone has experienced trauma, even complex trauma, this cannot be controlled really by the person. So we go into this type of behavior where we're kind of skittish, where we kind of secretive, where we're protective, and where we're defensive, where we walk on eggshells, where we, do certain things because those are the things that we've adopted as coping mechanisms back in the days when we were little. But now we're more mature. Now we have more power. Now we have more options. And we need to take a good look at this. Oftentimes we need a third party, like a therapist or a coach, to help us to see this. These are blind spots. Another thing, and this is something that I've noticed, especially here in this new age sort of spiritual community, is the misunderstanding or lack of sacredness. There's an over-interpreting of signs, the numbers, and getting fixated on this. So a fixation on something that is sacred, that is, mystical, that is telling me something, okay, without actually having the maturity to understand what it truly means. This is very difficult to discuss here because it really depends on the situation, but I think you know what I mean. It's like trying to see something in everything. This can also be, fantastical thinking. This can be magical thinking, and is not very healthy. All right. So we need the proper roadmap to know what these things mean. And you hear me talk about this a lot, the inner lexicon of sensations and feelings and emotions. We have to form this roadmap ourselves. We have to do this as part of our self-discovery and awakening journey. Nobody can tell us what this means, okay? But to fixate on things like I'm seeing numbers everywhere, or I'm seeing colors everywhere, or, and then to, read up an article that says, oh, if you see this, then it means that. That's not very mature. That's not promoting growth. That's not something that will actually help you. It's something that restricts you. So overall, it is the problem with toxicity is that it really comes down to our ability to connect with ourselves, with our true feeling, with our true sensations, emotions, and thoughts as well, and to witness them, and then to become better to express them. Our emotional vocabulary needs to be built. Our energetic vocabulary needs to be built so that we can refrain from these coping mechanisms that we've accepted as norm. Okay, and that's then what breaks the cycle. That's then what will prevent you from, attracting those kind of partners or those kind of relationships or, work relationships into your life. All right. I know this is a lot, guys. Just remember that spiritual freedom, okay, this is what this ultimately is all about, comes from the willingness, courage, and ability to discern what it is that you're experiencing. Because if you can't do that, then you can be manipulated. Then you can, buy into or will buy into illusions. And the only way to do this, guys, is to really work with your true self. All right. This is it for today. I'm wishing you a wonderful week. I hope that this gave you a few guidelines as to what to reflect on. And I would love to hear from you what you discovered in the process of your self-growth. Please share this here in the videos. Please share my videos, guys. And I hope to see you next week. Thank you for supporting transCODES. Bye-bye.